What's up, everybody? Brady Figuel here, coming at you with a album review for the new Cane Hill record, A Piece of Me I Never Let You Find, that was released this past Friday, November 1st. This is this band's third record, and their first actually since 2018, and on a personal note, this is actually my first full album experience listening to this band, who definitely seem to be a difficult band to kind of categorize. I know a lot of people are calling them nu metal, industrial metal. And just from quick listens of their older catalog, yeah, there's always been elements of that. Their last album in particular seemed really chaotic, like the kind of nu metal elements you might get from like early Slipknot, for example. But to me, the most prominent influences on this album are, on one hand, just modern metalcore, like you'd hear from the likes of Architects, for example, and also some more modern alt metal stuff, like obviously inspired by bands like Deftones. And of course, there are some very prominent industrial elements in this album as well. But I personally don't really hear any nu metal influence in this album, like at all. I think industrial influenced metalcore is probably the best way I can describe the overall sound of this album. And a song like The Midnight Sun, which is one of the singles which I really enjoyed, is a great example of that. In terms of the metalcore landscape, it sounds very modern, with that main riff being really fun. It's real slip-slidey. I really enjoy it. It makes it really catchy, and it sounds very dynamic. And I just really enjoy the way this song really spikes, and not in a way that makes it sound generic or run-of-the-mill. Like, you get that main riff and those heavy verses with some really catchy vocal cadences, and then that pre-chorus kind of slows things down, and you get vocalist Elijah Witt's more alt-metal-y and slightly synthesized clean vocals kicking in before kicking in again to a really full-sounding chorus. One of my favorite aspects of this album, I will say, is vocalist Elijah Witt, and on both his harsh vocals, which do sound very vicious and visceral, and his clean vocals, which do sound very synthesized. But rather than just sounding overproduced, I actually find that it complements the more kind of dystopian atmospheric elements of this album, which is also due in part to the very prominent industrial influences in a lot of parts of this album. One thing that I think separates this album from the broader generic metalcore, octanecore sound, which at times this album, I will admit, does border on. But my biggest issue I have with bands of that ilk, your I Prevails, your Escape the Fates, bands like that, are there aren't really many prominent emotions to latch onto. A lot of times it's just pure angst in the form of whiny clean vocals and screams. But the synthetic element of not just the production, but just the instrumentals in general and the overall atmosphere of this album really does make this album feel like something different and something more fresh, as opposed to just your generic octanecore. And I really appreciate that, especially coming from a band of this ilk that could just go full-on radio octanecore if they wanted to. Like the third track on here, Ecstasy and Grief, is one that really emphasizes the industrial elements in this album. This song is just really relentless pretty much the entire time, but then about just over a minute 30 in, you get this break, and you get, again, vocalist Elijah Witt's very synthetic, really cold-sounding clean vocals kicking in, and at this part particularly, he sounds almost a bit distant, which, again, I think really adds to the whole atmosphere of, again, dystopia, overall coldness, and the transition going from those really heavy parts to just that really quiet part is great. It just pauses. It's like almost a glitch type thing, like we'd hear from Code Orange, for example. It really stops you in your tracks in the best way possible. And then it kicks into just this bludgeoning, droning breakdown section with some really full echoey atmospheric background screams. It sounds awesome. Track 4, I Always Knew We Were Doomed, kind of switches things up in a sense that there's a much slower build-up in the song. It's, again, one of the more moody, more atmospheric cuts on this album, which usually end up being some of my favorite tracks on the album. The sound effects that drive pretty much the entire first half of this song really do feel like they drive the song rather than feeling like extra embellishments, and they complement vocalist Elijah Witt's really soulful vocal performance very well. And then again, just over 2 minutes in, it kicks into just this awesome, just beast of a guitar riff. You also have more of those really staticky, echoey background screams that add an awesome just extra layer of texture and complement the mood of the song very well. And this is one of several songs on this album that I just love the overall vibe of it. The overall mood that the song sets is just almost entrancing. And then following this track, we get into the song that really hooked me on this album in general, which is the song Fade, or Fade Into You. There's two versions on this album, and they sound almost identical. I think one's just slightly shorter. But this is just another song where I just love the overall vibe of the song. It's almost, again, hypnotic and almost seductive. I don't know why I have such a clear vision for this, and it's such a weird reference to make, but there's a movie that came out last year called Infinity Pool, where, just look up the overall synopsis of the movie. But there's a scene where like a bunch of the characters have like they take these like psychedelic drugs and just have this like weird like orgy basically, and like there's colors going on everywhere. Like the production of that scene was like, again, just really entrancing, and this song feels like it would be a perfect soundtrack to that, especially in its more moody and its more quiet parts. The heavy parts maybe not so much, but still the song feels very cohesive. The track Drowning Therapy maintains the album's momentum even further, with this song being a little bit more upbeat compared to the other songs on here, but still having a very distinguishable, again, moody vibe that the rest of the album has established so far. It has one of my favorite choruses on the album as well, just some really, again, catchy vocal cadences, and again, the synthesized production of vocalist Elijah Witt's tracks on here just really complement this album so well. The track Eye to Eye might be the heaviest track on the record. I especially love that real mean sounding riff that kicks in just over 1 minute and 20 seconds in. And this is another song that really sticks out on this album, especially considering the fact that even when the track does get a bit more quiet, a bit more dialed down, it still feels heavy. Like it doesn't feel like those moodier breaks that we've gotten in the prior track. This track doesn't really give you a chance to settle down like the others do on here. And the song is then complemented by the next track on here, How Could You Lose?, which is borderline like a straight up R&B song, but I fucking love it. One thing that I really have to compliment this album on is that it feels like it is meant to be presented as a full album in the sequence that it was listed at as far as the tracks. Like the album as a whole just perfectly executes these peaks and valleys, whether it's in songs themselves or whether it's between songs. And these two tracks in a row are a great example of it. This is another track that is just so hypnotic, with the really entrancing vocal performances in here and the more stripped back, more intimate sounding rhythm sections. When the guitars kick in, it makes this song just have this awesome crescendo to finish it off, whether it's those moody solo-esque guitars in the bridge section or it's those more clean sounding acoustic guitars after. That bridge just really elevates this song further, and then it ends on the chorus that the song has already established. I also have to compliment the sort of closing track on here, Finding Euphoria. It's just so fucking catchy in its somber parts and its heavier parts. This is another song that just has such an awesome balance between the different dynamics going on. As far as negatives, I don't really have many, if I'm being honest. I do think the intro track, as well as the mid-album interlude, the Sound of Roses in Bloom, it's called, don't really feel like those are super necessary. But that's also something I pretty much say about any tracks of that ilk. Anybody who watches my channel regularly knows that. I find them to oftentimes just be disruptive to the album's flow, especially in this case because a lot of the ideas used in those songs are already used in more interesting ways in the full-length tracks. And as far as the full-length tracks, I think Permanence In Sleep is really the only track on here that I find to be a bit skippable. It just kind of feels like filler. And again, a sense that it doesn't really do anything that other songs on this album don't do better. But even in those few gripes that I have, there's nothing bad on this album, if you ask me. If you aren't a fan of modern metalcore with, you know, the dynamic between the harsh vocals and the clean vocals and the Meshuggah-esque guitar riffs, which, I'll be honest, a lot of the times I'm not, and it's very easy for bands to make albums of that ilk that do sound very generic. But if you ask me, Cane Hill did not do that. They made a genuinely interesting album with lots of just awesome moods and atmosphere that just really complements the music so well, and it makes this album really stand out. I'm going to go ahead and give this album a score of 25 out of 30. As always, thank you guys very much for watching. If you would like to see more rock and metal-related content, definitely hit the subscribe button, and let me know your thoughts on this album below. I want to know what you think of it. Do you think it's generic, or do you agree with some of what I'm saying as far as the moods kind of making it stick out a little bit more compared to other albums of that ilk? Let me know. And of course, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.